wanted to talk, I came from Scotland when I was 17, and in those days everybody went to the movies a couple of times a week, and so I was a loner and an only child, and all those people on the screen were like my friends, you know? And then I came to America, and so went to New York when I was about 20, in the 60s. I was studying acting. I was studying at Strasbourg's and some other people. But anyway, I was living with a man by the name of John Balba, who was an actor. And he had been Roddy McDowell's roommate for 6 years. And Roddy knew everybody in the business, right? And Elizabeth Taylor was like his best friend, because Elizabeth did her first film with Roddy, National Velvet, which some of you might have seen. Anyway, one night, and John happened to be in Cleopatra with Roddy and Richard and Elizabeth, and so one night we're in New York City and we're in the apartment, and he said, "Do you want to meet Richard?" And I said, "Oh, I want to meet Richard Burton. Of course I want to meet Richard Burton." And he said, "Okay, we'll go to the theater," and he called and I guess talked to Richard, and so we went to the theater. Richard was doing Hamlet on Broadway, and so we walked in, and he had 2 dressing rooms. There was an inner and an outer dressing room, and the outer dressing room was for nighttime. When after the play finished, people would come, you know, and talk to him and everything. And it was like right after Cleopatra, when there was that horrible scandal with Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher and all that. So there was like hundreds of people outside the theater every night waiting to catch a glimpse of Richard and Elizabeth. And so anyway, that night I was sitting down facing Richard Burton. He came out and he said, "You look just like my wife." And I was like, so anyway, we sit down and he's drinking and talking and drinking, and you know, in the theater you have an intercom because you can't miss your cue, right? And so Richard says, "Excuse me, love," gets up, and 2 seconds later he's doing Hamlet's soliloquy. It was like, oh my God, because I was studying method acting. And you didn't do that. You didn't just go from one thing to another, right? Dennis
Hopper.
Dennis Hopper was in a play very close by, and Dennis was a method actor. And he had a scene where he had to enter out of breath, so he would run out of the theater and run around the block and then come in, and he was really out of breath, right? He would never sit and drink with people and talk with people and then get up and do Hamlet. You know, I mean, it was just extraordinary. So when the play finished, Richard came back, and all these people were coming into the dressing room, and it was like amazing. You know, it was Spyro Skouras, who was the head of 20th Century Fox at the time, and he's going on and on. "Oh, Richard, you're so, I love you. You have to come to Greece and do Shakespeare." And Richard's sitting there, and he said, "You love me so much. Why are you suing me?" You know, like $2 million, which at that time was a lot, right? And Spyro Skouras is saying, "It's not me, it's the studio." But anyway, then Elizabeth arrives, and she comes in, and I remember exactly what she was wearing and everything, but the main thing I noticed is she had Band-Aids all over her legs. You know, like Elizabeth Taylor wears Band-Aids. I mean, in her hair, she had bobby pins, the way I would do bobby pins, like this way and then cross it over so they don't fall out. You know, no fancy things in her hair, just bobby pins. And so anyway, the evening was amazing. There was a lot of interesting people there. And so a couple of days later, John tells me, "Oh, Elizabeth invited me over for dinner." Richard's still on Broadway doing Hamlet, so it was dinner with Elizabeth. And so I said, okay. So I left, and I went to my job. And I was working at the Fine Arts Theater in New York City. It was like a shishi theater with art films, and you sat in the lobby, you know, and I'm sitting there, you know, working, and my boss comes up, who's a former New York City police officer, Mr. McMahon. I'll never forget him. He was an angel. And he always wore a tux. And he comes up and he's walking around. He's really, you know, like something's happened, and everybody's looking at him. And he said, "Well, Elizabeth Taylor just called me." And he said, "She wants Irene to come for dinner. What do you think?" And everybody's saying, "What?" You so anyway, John had gone to the hotel. She was at St. Regis, and Elizabeth said, "Where's Irene?" She had met me that night, and he said she's working. So she called the theater and talked to my boss, and he was so tickled. And it was so cute because he was a doll. I mean, I loved him. And he was so thrilled that he talked to Elizabeth Taylor. But anyway, he called a cab and sent me over to the St. Regis. And I went up to the room, and there was Elizabeth, and that night she looked absolutely gorgeous. She had on this long pink kind of silky robe. And Philip Burton, who was a mentor of Richard's, no relation, and Roddy McDowell was there, and John Bell, my ex. Oh, well, he's now my ex. But at that time, we weren't married, we were just seeing each other. Anyway, so we had dinner, and Elizabeth was she was so sweet. I mean, we sat down, it was chicken and mashed potatoes, and she pulled her chair in and it made this noise on the floor, and she said, "That wasn't me." I was like, Elizabeth Taylor farts? No. I mean, it was really sweet. And then the guys all took off. I don't know where they went. But Elizabeth and I are sitting in the hotel, and I noticed there was a Utrillo painting above the piano. And I was into art at that time, and I loved Utrillo. And she said, "Oh yeah, it's a real, So anyway, we talked about that. And then she sent for Tiffany's. She called Tiffany's, and they delivered these two huge, like cases full of jewelry. And she went through them and she selected two pins, a cat and a turtle. This was in 1963, 64, something like that. And like 40 years later, I read in the paper that Elizabeth had returned the pins, and Tiffany's were really upset, saying, "Oh, she couldn't return them now." But I was there that night when she, but anyway, one more thing, and then I hang it up. I think my 5 minutes are up. The Utrillo painting was really funny because when Michael Jackson died, they were auctioning off all of his stuff. You remember that auction? And that painting was one of the things that was auctioned. And so I thought probably Elizabeth gave it to him as a gift because she really loved him. And but anyway, that's it was an interesting time. There were a lot of super people, and they were really nice. Richard was amazing.